All right, welcome into another Front Office Sports webinar. Today we're talking future of sponsorships, raising the bar in sport, presented by GumGum Sports. Super excited. Over the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about big data, computer vision, and proper KPIs as they relate to the sports sponsorship space. And we got a great panel for you, and I'm super excited to introduce them and let them kind of give you their background before we get into some questions. So super excited to have with us Jeff Katz, who's a VP of Strategic Partnerships at GumGum Sports. We also have Partilla, who's the head of global revenue at GumGum Sports. And then we're also joined by Michael Newman, EVP and managing partner of Scout Sports and Entertainment. Ian, I'll let you kind of kick it off with the introductions.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot, everybody, for joining us. It's definitely lovely to have everyone. So I'm the head of global revenue here at GumGum Sports. My background lies with the broadcasters primarily, ESPN, Fox, and NBC, where I spent 20 years on the sell side of the sponsorship equation, trying to help brands leverage all the different platforms that existed in action sports, golf, tennis, motorsports, and some others. So definitely a pleasure having everyone again. We're looking forward to a nice, effective, and 1 hour long chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Katz. I'm the, as he said, VP of Strategy and Strategic Partnerships for GumGum Sports. I'd say very briefly, 3 years ago, we started GumGum Sports. We founded it based on, we saw a need in the marketplace, and kind of that's where I've spent my career, is incubating new businesses for larger companies, medium to large companies who are looking to stay ahead of innovation or really do the disrupting.
All right.
Awesome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Newman. I am the EVP Managing Partner at Scout Sports and Entertainment, which is the in-house sports and experiential arm of Horizon Media, which is the largest privately owned media agency in the world. I launched this division back in 2010, so we celebrate 9 years this year. We're the only full-service sports marketing agency embedded in a media company today. I started my career a long time ago on the event side for many years, an event called Hoop It Up, eventually acquired by NBC Sports and the NBA. And after that, I went over to McDonald's. I worked on the brand for about 3 years, overseeing all their sponsorship and talent deals. And then since about 2000, I've been on the agency side. In 2006, I launched Amplify Sports and Entertainment. I ran that for 4.5 years, and I had an opportunity to come over to Horizon and launch Scout. And I did that, and we'll talk a lot about Scout today and why I made that decision in my career.
Awesome. Well, excited to have everyone here. If there's a little bit of background noise on my end, Slam is actually in the same building as us. They have the draft suite, and I heard Zion is supposed to come by at some point. So if he makes an appearance, it's not planned at all, but hopefully this should be a lot of fun. And as everyone, you can kind of see the chat, keep it interactive. If you have any questions, drop them in the questions tab. Feel free to answer the question in the polls tab as well. We'll be trying to keep things moving, keep things light and informational. So really kind of want to jump in here with the first questions. And I kind of want to direct this to Michael to start from the agency side is, what are some changes in measurement that have come of late with the explosion of big data, at least when it comes to sponsorship?
It's a great question. So listen, we're buyers of sponsorship. We buy a lot of sponsorship. We manage over 200 deals a year. From an IP perspective, and then we're buying close to $900 million a year in sports, in media. The biggest change that we're seeing with measurement and accountability is the ability to really focus on strategy with clients and convey that strategy across to the IP rights holders, and then make sure that we are working closely with media experts, buyers across many different verticals that are responsible for executing across integrated sponsorship. We were talking a little bit before about the importance of sports today and the role that sponsorship plays in the media mix. And if you are a student of our industry and you've been following what sophisticated brands are doing, it's very easy to see how sponsorships and associations with tentpole events and marquee sports properties become primary marketing platforms for brands that are looking to engage with consumers in a very relevant way. Live sports becomes the driver for much of what brands are doing. That's where the audiences are aggregating, and live is critically important. So when you take a look at how brands are amplifying across digital and mobile and social, and how linear drives it, and IP goes way beyond just executing promotional activity and empowering fans and consumers to visit brick and mortar locations and go online and follow the promotional path. What we're doing today, I think, is critically important, because foundationally we are establishing key performance indicators. We're focused on what our clients' needs are across their business, across many stakeholders. But the merger of IP and media, and getting media synchronized with what we're doing from a sponsorship perspective, I think is really driving our effectiveness as an agency and driving our clients' business.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting, you pointed out before how Scout is connected to this media business,
right,
the Horizon business. And when we look at, you mentioned live sports as being so super important today, in a fragmented media space to get the attention of the masses, whatever the TV ratings may be, and we've seen some very healthy TV ratings lately, whatever the ratings may be, there's a whole dynamic of live sports that carries on beyond the broadcast. So if we look at assets, signage assets for sponsors,
right,
how they're embedded in the content itself, how they insulate themselves from potentially commercial skipping through DVRs or ad blocking on the internet, and expand beyond TV as a channel into other channels like streaming, social, digital, and wherever else that signage will get a second life as it lives on beyond the broadcast. But just to kind of bring it back to, you mentioned some of the changes in sponsorship measurement, and kind of talking a little bit about, we like to talk about, and Ian covered this on a podcast recently, about data in and data out. Right. So what is an organization? What data do they take in to analyze is very, very important. Same as the data that comes out. What are the insights and the learnings for the business? We find that for data in, especially 3 years ago when we were starting GumGum Sports, we saw a little bit more of what we call directional data or soft metrics than we would have liked to.
Right.
And what we mean by that, if we look at say a TV media evaluation and what that meant 3 years ago, right, a couple of things that we saw as opportunities was, if we're only looking, say, at 10% of a season and extrapolating the rest of the season, that might be okay in a static signage environment. But once you introduce dynamic signage, and now we see, the sponsors per rights holder are so much greater. I mean, you've got rights holders. It's not untypical to have greater than 100 sponsors at a time. And so if you're only looking at 10% of the broadcast, the valuations are it's impossible to have accurate data, especially
right,
when your LEDs are switching constantly, and there's a lot happening there. And then, with the TV valuation, we also saw that TV wasn't enough. We had to expand. We had to do more. We had to look at other channels like streaming, social, digital, PR, and even digital piracy to capture all the value that we're seeing from that signage.
Right. Can I talk about soft metrics for a second?
Absolutely.
All right. So over 20 clients of ours are engaged in 200 sponsorships across the country. And when you talk about soft metrics, you're referencing what are you getting back from IP rights holders, right? And how are they helping their clients, the brands themselves, the sponsors, and agencies like us who are charged with managing their portfolio, managing their business, and driving their objectives. So I think, the biggest challenge we have, you've talked about what the headline or what the title of today's discussion is about, really the the broken format of sponsorship. I don't think it's broken. I think we have ways to go to fix it. I think we are moving in that direction. I think the biggest challenge we have is there's an infrastructure cost. There's an investment that needs to be made by the properties in order to provide the sophisticated analytics, data, and insights back to their partners. That all starts with a very thorough discussion on objectives and key performance indicators and goals and wants and needs. And what we say all the time is that there is I think it's happening right now. It's the start of a revolution where the properties are starting to think like agencies. And if they start to think like agencies and they put their strategic hats on, and they know that the fan journey is all year round, they know that the investment that their sponsors are making into their building and their venue and their association with their fan base, it has to be taken more seriously. So there's a cost that's associated with ramping up all the tools that are necessary, but it also requires a shift from people on our side to people on that side to think differently. It is a little bit of a paradigm shift. So I think the personnel needs to change a little bit, and we're starting to see it. I think the investment into the tools and the technology needs to happen. And I think when that happens, you'll see a more sophisticated product coming out of the IP side. And that's the leagues, and that's the teams, and that's also properties.
And we see now, to your point about this evolution, where various rights holders are now staffing up whole divisions dedicated to analytics, for example, which I think is it's not necessarily a given for the industry yet.
Right.
And from an analytics perspective, starting to identify new data sources that we can take in, as we said, as well as ways to provide the appropriate context for the metrics that we're looking at. You mentioned KPIs, for the data out and how to make that information actionable and create real business use cases for that data. And then just quickly to come back to soft metrics, I think a great example of soft metrics that we saw a lot of and still see often is looking at social media. And let's say I'm a brand, and I want to know how much value did a rights holder provide for me via social media, or how much value can a rights holder provide for me on social media? Kind of the standard practice back in the day was, well, I have 10 million followers, and we're bigger than some other team or the biggest in a particular league, and directionally absolutely relevant, but as we talked about, with over 100, sometimes over 200 brands that are competing for attention on the rights holders platform, what a brand really wants to know is, what can you do for me, and what have you done for me specifically? And to do that, you really have to look at every single social media post, every clip, every video, every photo, and it's a really kind of exciting time to be able to provide those kind of metrics.
Right. And I just want
to think about a really interesting example to tie a bow on the data in and data out here, guys. Is over the last just a couple of days, we have examples of in a sport that isn't necessarily known as being the most social sport, golf. You have Henrik Stenson, who shanked a golf ball, which is right there automatically an interesting story that takes a brand that is being represented like Mutual of Omaha on Henrik Stenson's hat outside of the normal golf audience. So he shanks a golf ball into the crowd, and unfortunately strikes a patron in the head, right? So now you have a patron lying down on the ground, and you have Henrik Stenson, who's not necessarily one of the most interesting golfers or the most charismatic, right? So all of a sudden you have Henrik Stenson laying down on the ground with his actual physical cell phone, taking selfies with the patron who was struck in the head with the ball, and Henrik has Mutual of Omaha across the top of his hat.
Right.
That particular moment is a great example of data in, data out, and the so what factor. because Mutual of Omaha had not the foggiest or inkling of a clue that they would get that sort of outreach or, brand value from Henrik Stenson's hat to as large of an audience as they did like that. But the data in part was we as a company were able to see something like that, and and we're able to share that back with the folks at Mutual of Omaha with the so what factor attached to it. So this moved outside of the PGA. This moved outside of the actual physical IP rights holder of the actual tournament. This went all over the place and made Mutual of Omaha look interesting, made Henrik Stenson look interesting, made golf look interesting to a new audience, and all of that drives value that was never found before. That's such a simple and interesting example of why we're all gathered on this phone. And if you look at the poll right here, already we've got, some of the, the pain points that you guys are sharing with us is, 33% of you are sharing that, one of the biggest pain points of measurement is it's not streamlined. Well, we're trying to make it more streamlined when we go out and find these examples for all of you more quickly. We're seeing that you guys share here that it's not, cross-platform. Well, we were able to figure out with this particular example across all of the different platforms where that particular piece of content went. And it wasn't even live sports. It was them laying on the ground in the grass. And then, of course, you guys share that it's, it's sometimes too complicated. And that's where the data in, data out comes. When you've got, folks like, Scout or folks like GumGum partnered with Scout sharing the so what, why it's interesting, very quickly a CMO has, an interesting data point on why that hat sponsorship did something new today. So I just think that's a really interesting example.
Yeah, that's the beauty of sports. I'm glad that you brought that up. And that's why our clients invest in sports. That's why most of the major, Fortune 250 brands are invested in sports, because that was our philosophy when we created the concept of having the Burger King walk with Floyd Mayweather in 2015 for the first time from the dressing room to the boxing ring, because we knew that there was an enormous aggregation of interested consumers. There was an event that crossed over from sports to mainstream, a little bit like some of these Hallmark golf events do, right? Especially when Tiger makes the cut. And we knew at the pinnacle moment when the attendance would be the highest, if we did something that normally people wouldn't see, they would talk about it and there would be a value to that, right? And that's exactly what you referenced. And I agree. And we've had these conversations offline about when these moment marketing things happen, how do brands react, right? So what does Mutual of Omaha do in a situation like that? Or what's the value of that situation? And some of those you can actually replicate in the future in less organic ways. There's lessons that are being learned every time something happens organically. And then the last thing I want to say to close the loop on what we were talking about before on the soft metrics and the relationship that agencies like us have on behalf of our brands with the IP rights holders, think about how challenging it is for this office here to manage the objectives and the personalities and the brand needs and the brand positioning of 20 plus consulting clients, right? That's a small number compared to what the chief revenue officer responsible for revenue at a team is managing, because most teams have between 25 and 100 partners, right? So think about the difficulty we have, and I have an office that's stacked with experts on managing strategy, execution, and measurement. If you have a population of sponsors and clients that you're responsible for, and you don't have the right personnel that understands that management process, you know how hard it is to manage the personalities of 25, 50, 75, 100 brands that you're beholden to. So again, that's a little bit of a lesson on, I think, how the industry is going to change when teams start thinking like an agency and start operating like one.
Makes a lot of sense.
Definitely. Hopefully Mutual of Omaha comes out with like a head insurance or something. That'd be pretty funny.
Or a silly like hard hat that they would roll out for
Exactly.
a future event, something like that. Just to kind of have a bit of fun with it.
That'd be awesome. So I guess we've talked a lot about the measurement and everything like that, but I think there's another option and another element to this is just like challenges that you're now facing because of a lot of these different types. There's KPIs, and there's a question mentioned. If there's so many different KPIs, there's so many people who are measuring things different ways. What are the challenges that exist in buying, managing, and renewing sponsorships, and how are you kind of finding a way to navigate those?
the challenges of buying, managing sponsorship, where do you begin?
Yeah.
So look, I think the first challenge is the reason why there's no black box for sponsorship in the first place, or to measure sponsorship, is because it's so very different than the purpose of advertising, right? Advertising, let's reach as many people as we can for the least amount of money. Sponsorship and marketing is all relationship based, and it affords a brand the ability to have conversations with stakeholders in multiple divisions that go beyond the people that are responsible for media. And you can check a lot of boxes with sponsorship that you can't with media. And if you do your job right, you're talking to a whole number of people. Like horizontally, we talk to a good half a dozen to a dozen people every time we put together a strategy for a client. The biggest challenge we have is how do we establish the appropriate strategy in a time frame that allows us to go to market quickly, right? So we can put deals together. We don't want to miss any opportunities. And then how do we express in a partnership format? How do we do that with properties, like I said earlier, that have so many responsibilities to different sponsors and brands that how do I get them to buy into what our clients need? How do I get them to how do I get them to partner with me on driving success so we're in the game together, and when it comes time to renew a sponsorship, it's not a concern because it's an investment that's working. And I think the biggest challenge is really getting the properties on board, understanding what our clients' needs are, and then working with us to execute. That's a philosophical challenge, right? The other challenge that we have is getting the information from them that we need. Like you guys play a big role in that, right? So we get a lot of data that's produced by GumGum that comes our way across linear, social, and other platforms that's helping us to understand what those fixed signage valuations are. Where's that earned media? Where's that earned publicity coming from? But when it comes to other areas, as I said earlier, there's a lot of education that comes from our side to their side in getting teams and leagues and properties to support and understand what our clients' needs are, and then working with us to get us the information that we need.
And to add to that, in that kind of back and forth between GumGum and Scout and producing those insights,
right.
It's certainly super helpful and important to have access to the Horizon part of the business,
right.
and really rely on the cross-channel media insights, especially when we look at media equivalency and looking at the more traditional channels. As we figure out, what would that have cost in order to get that same amount of reach and engagement through other
right.
Through other channels, and then also talking about a little bit more tactically, like what does this look like when brands partnering with rights holders and with agencies to really surface the right kind of information to make for a healthy relationship. I think it starts with reporting and transparency. And I don't think anyone's at fault here. I think it's more just where the industry is today. We talked about data in, right? Is the data in far enough along to the point where rights holders are able to be fully transparent and provide a great level of detail to brands? Are brands who historically have really relied exclusively on rights holders for reporting, are brands going to kind of follow the lead of their digital counterparts who are doing a lot of auditing and kind of validating their spends? Are they going to kind of follow suit and do their own due diligence and provide their own reporting to the table? I think that's a significant piece of this puzzle.
Could you do me a favor, just so everyone who's watching understands, because you mentioned the role of Horizon in media evaluation. can you just give a quick tutorial on how an organization like GumGum values the brand imagery that you're tracking, and can you just talk about that? Because I want to then come back and talk about the importance of media accuracy, and I think it's important that you go first before I address that.
Sure. Yeah. I think, Ian, jump in whenever you'd like, but we start with TV, and let's look at the live broadcast. How do we value a live sports broadcast and the assets that get showcased in a live broadcast? So from a TV perspective, what markets did the TV broadcast air in globally? Because now there's so many global distribution deals, and we'll talk about that later, that's super relevant. So what is the cost equivalent? What is the TV spot cost, 30-second TV spot cost in all of those different markets? And then looking out the number of seconds, the duration, and the number of exposures, and the quality of the exposures that each of these brands got,
right?
And combining that with what is the spot cost in each of those locations, in each of those regions. But then we have to go further. We have to look at, okay, well, where did it stream? And on a streaming platform, what's the cost of pre-roll? What would it have cost to get in front of that audience on that streaming platform? What would the cost be to get in front of that audience on social media? And rights holders don't control social media. They have their walled gardens, they have their owned accounts, but there's the broader kind of wild west of social media where content goes where it goes. So how do you look at what the cost per engagement, cost per thousand for reach, for videos, for images, for text, for hashtags, and really bringing that all together, into what we call a media valuation. But it has to be super granular at an asset by asset level, so that right. Scout and others can advise clients on the efficacy and efficiency of each of these pieces of the puzzle in their portfolio.
Right. So the world that you live in, and you are in the process right now of kind of redefining, and you did it so eloquently, the role that you play and how you can deliver value and information and insight back to agencies like us, and also directly to brands and leagues. You go back to a time when people were literally taking a stopwatch and tracking the exposure that a brand was getting, and then they were coming up with their own formulas to determine what the value was. We've worked with all sorts of organizations in your industry, and the challenge that we've always faced, and same with other agencies, was we felt that there was this heightened elevation of value, right? There seemed to be everything comes off of the 30-second spot, right? You have your algorithms, you have your buying attributes, you have a very sophisticated way of coming up with what that final value is, but it all stems off that 30-second commercial. Where we come in, and I think this is one of the reasons why I made the decision in 2010 to leave Amplify and come and start Scout at Horizon, is I knew where the business was going. I felt it. Our CEO felt it. Live sports was going to become more valuable, and if that was the case, and obviously integration into other and amplification into other verticals of media, it was critically important that the foundation of the analysis had to be right. And a media agency like ours, I'll give you Geico as an example. We would get reports on Geico signage throughout the country, and even from you guys in the early stages of our relationship, but from your competitors, and they were high. And I am never comfortable putting an inflated value in front of a client, even though it looks great. It has to be accurate to conservative. And so an agency like Horizon has the ability to verify the cost of the media in that environment, because if we bought that media like assets, we bought that media through an upfront investment, we got a very efficient cost. So we do that. We recalibrate all the valuations based on what we know the media cost is, and I think that's critically important. And so, there are agencies that don't have
on that, Ian? It looks like they just dropped for a second. Kind of just keep rolling with that thought.
Yeah. So I think where he was headed, right, was the fact that when these upfront purchases are potentially taken into account in a media spend, those upfront media purchases are bought at such an efficient rate that when, in the past, I was in the same boat as Michael. I worked at ESPN and for the X Games for many years, and then worked at NBC on a number of the action sports properties there as well. And I used to buy all sorts of data too. I bought every media measurement service that was ever invented, I feel like. And some of those numbers that you would get back at times, got borderline silly.
Right, right.
Without, without a level of discipline, understanding and stick-to-itiveness to the fact that while for many years those numbers did get borderline silly, that there are now companies and organizations and partnerships like Scout and GumGum and others out there that are trying to be more reasonable, and they're sticking by the fact that if you saw the piece we put out about the Rolex clocks at the PGA Championship at Bethpage in New York, a few weeks back, we put it out this morning. GumGum did. I got a couple notes already that said those Rolex clocks seem low. Okay, appreciate your opinion, but we're confident in our methodology. And the other interesting thing is, and I'll give it back to Michael now, is our methodology is also not a black box. We are an open organization that shares very openly and publicly what our calculation and the basis of our methodology is. Go ahead.
And Ian, what I was going to add to that, and you just started touching on it, which is, not only are we getting greater accuracy because of the access to resources like Horizon, but we're also able to show at a very granular level of detail every single social media post, every single exposure that drove those numbers. So even if there could be a semblance of disbelief of a media value, you can always see what backs up that media value. Let's dig into it. Let's look at that exposure. Let's look at that media value percentage, the quality score. It's all there. There's no more of that, mystify black box that you were referencing, Ian.
Yeah, there's a lot of other people in the industry that, you take the moment before about Mutual of Omaha. There's a lot of people that minutes after that happens or an hour after that happens, they'll put out a tweet saying that, hey, here's my source, and this is the value that Mutual of Omaha just received. And we've talked about this offline. I question that immediately because I don't understand how they know what the media cost is of that moment, because they're not media buyers, right? And there's going to be a spectrum of cost in that program. Was it part of an upfront? Was it committed as a larger package? Was it a scatter buy? Where did that investment, at what stage, and at what stage of the buying process did it happen? And that can fluctuate the value at that moment. And most times the values are being placed off of a market rate, which is rare for an agency like us to go in and buy, because we're usually more strategic in the way that we buy sports. And I think most of the top 200, 250 brands that have sophisticated planning and buying agencies like Horizon Media would probably feel the same way.
And I think one of the things that, kind of just dovetailing off of that and just talking about some of these questions we have, Mark is wondering, and I would like to know from Michael's standpoint if you find this true or false. He said, you state that all the sponsors have different KPIs and objectives. How can IP and rights holders be expected to deliver analytics when everyone's KPIs and their objectives are different? Aren't the analytics the responsibility of the brand or the brand agencies?
That's an awesome question. We actually have you're 100% right. That's a great question, and your point is accurate. In our preparation for today, I actually said the accountability lies with me, it lies with our agency, and it lies with our people. Because one of the questions is, do we blame, if we're getting soft metrics back, who do we blame? So we have to blame ourselves. we have a very good track record with the properties that we work with. They feel that they're informed. They feel that they know what our clients, their sponsors need. We work very, very hard at that. Believe it or not every one of the top 100 brands that invest in sponsorship, some of them still do a lot on their own. They're not using agencies, and they got a lot going on, and sometimes they don't convey KPIs effectively over to the IP side. So that's a great question. It's always on us. If there's ever a disconnect between what our clients' goals and objectives are and what our partners on the IP side are able to provide us back, whatever they don't provide us back, it's our responsibility to produce that. And along the way, we're educating those on the IP side, and we're creating this really strong symbiotic relationship. I remember, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years ago, I was speaking on a panel and I talked about the importance. I was probably using this term from the HBO show Entourage, but I said, look, we hug it out with our partners on the team side every single day. And the days of the teams not really wanting to work with agencies like ours, those are long gone. We're in the business of putting deals together. We're in the business of renewing deals. So are the teams. There isn't a long line of sponsors lined up in each category to take over those category sponsorships if somebody moves away. So the teams are working harder and doing a much better job of collaborating with us on our clients' needs. But at the end of the day, to your point, it's on us. And if there's a disconnect, the fault lies with the agency. And then we need to go back to the drawing board and extract more from our brand clients. And then we need to do a better job of conveying that to the teams and getting, like, we're starting a relationship with a new client. We're going into a new market. We just signed off yesterday on what the strategies are. So that's part one. Now, part two is my team's going to go into the market. We have calls set up with 2 teams, one on the NHL side, one on the Major League Baseball side. Our job now is to get them to sign off on what we just got our client to sign off. And then I got that triangular relationship ready to go, and we can move ahead and put a contract together.
And when we talk about accountability and KPIs, what happens, right, when we don't necessarily have granular KPIs. We might have a general KPI to say we care about brand exposure or brand affinity or some kind of metric. What happens is, from a rights holder perspective, there's risk. It creates risk because when a rights holder has perhaps a recap meeting with a brand and it's a general KPI, that conversation could become a little bit subjective. If we're not clear on, say, how much reach, how much engagement, a little bit more specific so that we can look at a value and at least have that to start and to frame the conversation. So we see the KPI piece as something that can help both sides of the relationship strengthen the relationship. We also look at it as something that gives a rights holder an ability to differentiate itself, where it's able to bring a level of objectivity to conversations and to go even a step further, where once you have KPIs and once specific KPIs, granular KPIs, and once you have an ability to those and show those and have that source of truth, then you can start having a conversation around bridging the gap between sports and other channels like digital marketing, where you have things like impression guarantees. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a brand, would I prefer to put my money with a rights holder who can guarantee perhaps some minimum level of impressions? And that part of the conversation, unfortunately becomes very, very much at the front of the conversation when you have a situation where a rights holder perhaps loses a star player. Look at when LeBron left the Cavaliers for the Lakers and the impact that had to a sponsor like Goodyear and the positive impact that it had to Wish, right? So from a rights holder perspective, to be able to give the assurance and to be able to track that KPI throughout the entire life cycle, not just towards the end of the life cycle where it's too late to make good. I think it's a very strong value proposition that a rights holder can bring to the negotiating table to be able to assure the brand some minimum level of value that they can guarantee.
Right. So
I can share an example of some work that I'd done in the past, and an example of where brands do quite a good job. Just not enough brands are doing that particular work as well as others. So Mountain Dew and Pepsi with the Dew Tour used to give very clear direction to the NBC Sports Group, to Ally Sports, the organization that I had back then. And Michael was a part of buying a number of the sponsorships that we had available back then as well. But they provided some fantastic direction to us at the very beginning of every year. We would sit down and do full-blown goal setting exercises with them. And then throughout the year would provide, updates on how, we were tracking towards those goals. And those goals were very clear. They weren't just, I need X number of impressions because, we're going to deliver that on our media schedule anyway. But it was things like, we want this many interactions on major posts. We want branded content to go out quickly after major lifestyle events happen at Mountain Dew. You have to be on the ready to create that piece of branded content for us and push it out. While rights holders need to, start working on this KPI goal setting with their customers just to provide a better experience and to delight their customers at a higher level, brands also need to get smarter about pushing their rights holder to deliver that for them as well. So it really is a balance. But like I said, there are many brands out there who come to you on the upfront and have that expectation, and it really it helps quite a bit when that sort of communication is the regular.
Yeah, I just want to share a story that happened just a couple of short months ago. So Scout's gotten into the property consulting side of the business. For many years, we felt that there was some inequities in the property side's ability to, for lack of a better word, just compete with the sophisticated analytics that we brought to the negotiating table on behalf of our clients. And we always felt that we were educating and being really great corporate citizens and helping the sales teams to better understand, how they can improve their ability to support and ultimately negotiate a good partnership with our client. So our first foray into it was helping Monumental Sports and Entertainment repackage, revalue, reassess the total aggregate valuation of what was then the Verizon Center. And we showed them through many different approaches that they had a great property on their hands, worth more than what they thought. And, they eventually sold their building to Capital One, 10-year deal, for more money than they thought. And it was a really interesting deal and got a lot of press. And I think people were interested in the industry as to how much it was reported that Capital One was paying over the term. And it was at that moment that it really clicked for us that, there's a blue ocean opportunity for an agency like us that manages sponsorship, has a relationship with you, has the media expertise here, and also has the insights. We haven't even talked about fan and consumer insights. So a couple of months ago, we're representing an NFL team, and we're on a call with our clients on the team, and we're taking a major sponsor through a renewal. And in that renewal, the team is asking that brand, that sponsor, for a larger investment. And in exchange for that larger investment, there's a retooling of assets. And the person on the other end, the decision maker for the brand, favorably reacts to us taking them through our position or our defense of the increased ask, and makes a very significant comment to our client that they work with a lot of organizations. They have a lot of assets in their portfolio. They have a league deal. They have team deals, and said, look, in a very short period of time, you guys have really put yourself in an incredible position to provide information and insights back to us. We're really pleased with what it is that you're offering us, because we feel really good about it as we're thinking about making this larger investment. So I think there's a big mountain to climb in our industry in order to kind of level the playing field between the agencies like us and the properties. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? What's going to produce is a better product for the industry, because brands are going to be more effective in their exploitation of their commercial assets, and everyone's going to be more informed. And we're going to push forward with this. We have about a half a dozen clients right now on the property side that we consult, and we are packaging a variety of those insights that we use for our brand clients. Now we're sharing that with properties, and I like what I see so far.
Just a quick FYI, get to some of these questions that we're seeing come in and trying to provide some quickie answers. So follow along. We will not be able to get to every single one of these questions that are in here, obviously, but I'm not being rude and typing over here. I'm actually trying to answer some of your questions. So these questions are fantastic. I want to share that, and thank you for all the follow-ups that you guys are providing as well.
I think another thing too, from your guys' standpoint, and I guess we touched on it on the global standpoint, but with the increased globalization in sport, how can teams, leagues kind of position their inventory for selling abroad, leveraging social, just as these teams and leagues look beyond their market and say, okay, how can we be bigger, right? Like, there's a big push for globalization. You see plenty of these teams, you see even leagues championing at Major League Baseball, going to London and NHL and China, those types of things. How are these teams and leagues able to take advantage of that from a sponsorship standpoint?
Well, I think one of the really exciting things that's happened over the last 5 to 10 years is how even the most seemingly regional team now has a global platform, because any team at any level, whether professional, semi-professional, even at the high school level. I mean, we see LeBron's son all the time. I never knew of any athletes at that level, and now Instagram after one post. So, I think you look at an RSN, a regional broadcast, it's no longer regional. Yes, the broadcast itself, it airs in a certain region, but anything newsworthy or any highlights that come from that game are fair play. Right. And I think when you look at how do you position then to potential global brands to invest in you as a rights holder, you can look at things like, what is the percentage of your social audience coming from different countries like the Philippines or China or various European countries. I think that's all lenses that we apply when we're looking at social media, as well as global TV broadcasts and even digital piracy that happens in all the different corners of the globe.
What's most fascinating to me is I think it impacts the business of the sport more so than it does the value of the sponsorship. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the intelligence coming out of the NBA back in the 90s, and the fact that they were pushing NBA content out to places like India and China, and not asking for, at least initially, not asking for a rights fee, just shipping content out and exposing sports fans in China to the brand of NBA basketball, and what that means today, and how they've been able to build that sport, in a different country, and build celebrities there. That was a very distinctly intelligent move by the NBA. Today, you don't have to do that. You don't have to have a forced plan in order to do that, because your point is well spoken.
And just quickly, Dan Lazar, yes, Savannah Bananas, great example. But please continue.
Yeah. So the challenge that I have from a buying perspective is, let's say I have a domestic U.S. only client. I have a regional car dealership. I have a client like Geico. I have a regional casino that I represent. I love the passion and the opportunity to have some of that exposure wind up outside of their area of dominant influence, but unfortunately I'm not going to pay for it. I don't, unless it's a global brand. And again, think about those types of global brands. They're involved in the Olympics, they're IOC, they're FIFA sponsors, and other UEFA partners as well, and other things, F1 globally. So a lot of the agencies that we compete with here in the US, a decent portion of their portfolio only cares about the US. But I do think it's a great question, and I think that from a business perspective, I think it builds the sport, which builds the merchandise, which builds ratings and builds sales. I think all of that's extremely important.
We have about 8 minutes here, and I want to get some questions. Michael in the chat has one, and I think this would be pointed towards ours, Michael. But he said, we're working to stream young sports that don't have many eyeballs yet. Our streaming tech also provides new forms of sponsorship. How do we get evaluated by agencies and sponsors and convince them early on? Maybe from your standpoint, what are you looking for?
Yeah.
I'm looking for relevancy. I want to see what kind of organic content is out there. Are people following, some of the athletes? Again, I'm really looking for a conversation. I want to see how relevant the sport is. I want to see if it's scalable. Those are the things we're looking at. Unfortunately, when you're attached to a media agency and a good portion of your clients are also attached to that media agency and you're fixated on their IP, the mentality is scale and efficiency, right? So we're the complementary piece to all that. But a lot of our other clients that work with us exclusively on sports, and they use other agencies for buying and planning. In that situation, we have a larger opportunity to talk about sports in a different way, because we're not as attached to their media buying and planning. So those brands look at us differently. But again, the short answer to the question is, how's it trending? How's it pacing? How relevant it is? What kind of organic conversation is happening? We're doing a lot of research. We're trying to understand if it's bubbling up, if it's percolating. And then there are things that we like, and we'll get involved early. And we do know that younger audience is very appreciative of brands that support. Look at what some of the brands are accomplishing, with gaming right now. They're getting in early. It's still an interesting environment. We still don't have the fantastic non-endemic case studies to really study.
By the way, gaming, you mentioned gaming. I mean, that has quickly become one of our top verticals.
Yeah.
Like within 6 months, it just shot right to the top.
So valuations in gaming is still all over the place, because gaming is a platform that lives mostly digital, mobile, and social, and there's a lot of fragmentation there, and there's a lot of entry points as well. So that's an area that we know has enormous scale, but I think many components of our industry are still struggling, and we're not there yet.
Yeah, something that to go back to Michael's question here in the chat window about smaller sports or smaller audience sizes is something that we found effective when we were at NBC and we were dealing with some of the smaller sports was packaging a number of those sports up and trying to show scale that way. Honestly, like Michael Newman just shared, when you have a media agency behind you, sometimes it is very difficult to prove efficiency and scale at the same time with some of these smaller properties. But when you can ultimately generate a larger scale by packaging up a number of them together, especially where the audiences are complementary, it helps a lot. An example of that would be action sports. An example of that would be the World Surf League. It took a long time to get those sports into the Olympics, right? And back in the day when action sports started, skateboarding was a crime on the public sidewalks that are right out in front of our homes. So any skaters who are on this webinar know that that's a fact. And that's 1995. Skateboarding was a crime. Now your taxpayer dollars fund the skate park in your neighborhood.
Right.
So that's a monumental shift in sport. But in the very beginning, when we were trying to sell motocross over here and snowboarding over there and skiing over here, you had to figure out a way to package it all up. I think DAZN is trying to do. I think DAZN is doing pretty interesting work here. I think Flow is doing very interesting work there. I think the American Cornhole Association is doing some really interesting work there. Believe it or not,
they're in our offices last week,
trying to get scale and trying to show, hey, the audience is there. So, Michael, it's a great question, and thank you for sharing that one with us.
I hit as we get into the last 4 minutes here. I think this is a good one, just from a holistic kind of look. Mark asked, "Do you think brands are holding a different standard than media companies?"
Do I think brands are holding rights holders to media companies? I
have a quick comment. I think media companies have an easier job of providing a media plan at the end that was guaranteed on the upfront and was proven at the end. So do they have an easier job? Heck yeah. And as a sponsorship executive for many years, it was so hard in the end trying to prove what success was when there was nothing established on the front end.
Right.
But that's just a quick opinion from me. Newman, please.
No, I agree. I wanted to listen. Politically, I have to be careful about what I say, but I do agree. I think the brand should hold them more accountable. And listen, we've seen some really interesting movements in the last couple of years where there have been some questions about ethics from rights holders that have not only concerned fans, but have also concerned the corporate community. And we've seen the corporate community step up either individually or collectively and make their voices heard that their investments can't be counted on unless there is accountability and a return to ethics within certain sports properties. And so I do think the brands have a little bit of leverage because, at the end of the day, there are three main components, but media rights and sponsorship revenue and ticket sales really drive our industry. But the sponsorship support is the credibility. Those are the ingredients, the main ingredients of credibility that show that a sport has arrived. You mentioned earlier about a young sport with coming up, and how do you convince brands that we manage to invest? Once you get a marquee brand to support your property, it sends a very strong message to the rest of the brand community that this agency or this brand believes in this space and believes in this platform's ability to connect emotionally with target audiences, and people start to pay attention.
And I do think, just quickly, I do think there is an appetite to bridge the gap a little bit more between the traditional media channels and sports. So, we didn't get to cover this today, but we will be covering it in Q3 with some editorials on it. But basically, the concept of a programmatic signage exchange for sports.
Right.
So programmatic is such a big buzzword and has been for such a long time in digital. And I'm not saying that sports will just become exactly like digital, but there's certain elements of digital that should be a piece of the sports ecosystem, and being able to essentially better allocate inventory around LEDs, around other kinds of signage based on the likelihood of that LED having value. So bidding on moments, bidding on potential moments in sport that could live on forever. If I'm a brand, I might want to put a little bit more of my money towards one of those moments, like the last 2 minutes of a close game.
Yeah, and if we ever got to that point in programmatic, it's going to be a massive shift in the ecosystem, because there are brands today that won't touch sponsorship because it's not performance-based. So if you go to a programmatic format, you're bringing new brands in, and then you're bringing direct type of brands in as well, because there's a whole nother side of media that traditional advertisers are more focused on than the response type of brands. Also, Adam, you're more than welcome to share my email with everyone. I know there's a bunch of questions that we didn't get. I see them in front of us and we're not going to get. I'm more than happy to answer questions offline if you want to share that out with everyone after the webinar.
I can type it in, or you can tell them. Yeah, sure. I think everyone's right.
Sure, it's Newman, MNEUMAN @Scout SCOUT, S for sports, E for entertainment.com. mnewman@scoutse.com.
Yeah, and something I want to bring up about a potential programming exchange, or excuse me, a programmatic exchange in sport. Let's start with 1.0 first. As rights holders, I would find it really interesting to start using going back to data in and data out. Some of the data in that you guys are now collecting to start selling simple things that are 100% going to happen this season. So I'm a huge Pittsburgh fan. I was born and raised there, right? So the joke is, if you don't cheer for the Penguins, Pirates, and Steelers, your mother doesn't feed you, right? So when nice, there's a Rolling Rock, right? So when Ben Roethlisberger completes his 50,000th yard passing, and that's going to happen this coming season, sell that to Coca-Cola on the upfront. Go to Nike, who is his footwear partner, and figure out a way to take the branded content of that pass and put Nike on it forever. These are the simple these are the simple things that in the programmatic world could be moments that you could sell that are going to happen. That would be almost 1.0. 2.0 is this exchange concept. 3.0 is taking it to a whole nother level. And here at GumGum, we're a tech company, and we fancy ourselves from time to time, kind of interesting and smart about a couple of things. And one of the things is natural language processing. What happens, in a world where we can hear during a sporting event every single time, a football game, and an international football game, a soccer match, that we can hear every single time a corner is given. And when a corner is given, we're able to pump out 360 degree LED ribbon sponsor for 100% share of voice to one partner for every goal, or excuse me, for every corner kick with 5 minutes remaining in a close game. That's 3.0. So the world of sport is going to change, but it doesn't have to go right to 2.0 or 3.0. Sell Ben's 50,000th yard, sell Mario Lemieux's 10,000th hat trick. Sell your playoffs part.
A lot of hat tricks.
Think about the impact that kind of environment has on creative. So rather than presenting a logo bug, you can engage fans in a conversation. If it's a corner kick, work that into the creative. Show that what's happening as a brand. Right. What's happening in the sport, and you can weave your brand story into that moment.
So that is exactly how we got to when I said earlier, when we came up with the idea to have the Burger King walk with Floyd Mayweather. We knew in May of 2015 exactly what Ian's talking about. We knew that was the moment. And then after Pimlico, when American Pharoah won the second leg of the Triple Crown, we knew that the next moment that everyone would have their eyes on sports, we knew it was going to be the Belmont Stakes, and we did it again. So Ian's point is brilliant. There are things that are happening that you can predict. You can't predict the Mutual of Omaha moment, but you can predict a lot of things where there's going to be a lot of eyeballs, there's going to be a lot of cut-ins, and that is 1.0, and that's a really good point that you bring up.
And I think it's a great point to end on. As the old saying goes, time flies when you're having fun. Everyone who joined us, really do appreciate it. And to Jeff, Michael, and Ian, thank you guys for spending the last hour plus with us. I know we went a little bit over here, but obviously it's passion points for everyone, and everyone likes to talk about. Everyone who is joining us, if you may missed anything or you want to go back and rewatch, in about 5 to 10 minutes after this is done, you guys will all get a copy sent to your email. And if you don't, for some reason, give us a shout, but you should all get that. And again, thank you guys, everyone, for joining us, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Everyone, have a great day.
Take care.